Welcome back to the channel, where every story leaves a little something behind. Today, we begin with a boy whose feet knew no rest and whose eyes never stopped searching. Every morning before the sun opened its full eyes, he was already on the road. His slippers had holes, his shirt begged for retirement, and his water bottle was more dent than bottle. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that small wooden school 2 villages away. He walked to it like someone chasing something the world could not see. The road wasn't smooth. Sometimes it rained and turned everything into one long brown struggle. Sometimes it was the sun that made the trees look tired and the ground so hot it felt like walking on firewood. But he kept going, always with his book squeezed tightly under his arm. People laughed. Some even shouted, "Na book go feed you?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, the kind that said, "You'll see." In that school, he sat on a bench with 3 other boys. The blackboard had more scratches than words, and the teacher often borrowed chalk from another class. But when he read aloud, everyone turned. His voice carried something, hunger, but not for food. He didn't have money for lunch, so he drank water and sucked mango seeds when they were in season. He didn't complain. He was too busy listening, learning, writing. Even his shadow seemed to follow the teacher's every move. Then came that hot afternoon. The teacher had stepped out for a break, and someone important walked in. A visitor. A man in clean clothes with glasses that looked expensive. He was just passing by, they said. But he stopped to rest in the shade and heard a boy reading out loud, to himself, confidently, with no teacher in sight. The man didn't move. He just listened. And something shifted that day. They said he was wasting his time. That even if he crammed the whole book into his head, it wouldn't change his surname. But he kept walking. The mango tree beside the bend in the road had become his friend. It didn't talk, but it never laughed either. That afternoon, after the man with glasses stood and asked for his name, something strange happened. He didn't answer at first. He thought it was a trick. Maybe someone wanted to embarrass him, or maybe the man mistook him for someone else. But the man asked again, softer this time. He told him. Then the man smiled and sat down on the broken bench outside the class. "Read for me," he said. The boy opened his book like it was a treasure box. And as he read, the man didn't blink. Flies buzzed. Somewhere a goat bleated. But the man just kept watching him. When he finished, the man nodded slowly, the way elders do when their thoughts are full. The next day, the boy reached school earlier than usual. He swept the class, cleaned the board, even watered the little plant the teacher forgot outside. He didn't say anything about the men. He didn't want to jinx it. But by break time, the headmaster called him out. Everyone turned. Some thought he had stolen something. Some whispered. His legs felt weak, but he followed. The man was back. This time with a small bag and a serious face. They talked for a while. Not loud. Not long. Just enough. Then the man gave the boy the bag and asked him to open it. Inside, he saw 2 shirts, 1 clean exercise book, and a brown envelope. The boy touched the items like they would disappear if he wasn't gentle. "Tell your mother to read that letter," the man said. And just like that, he got back into his car and left. The students stared. The teacher came out and watched the dust trail vanish. That night, the boy couldn't sleep. His mother read the letter 3 times. Her hands trembled. Her wrapper came loose. She tied it again without noticing. Something had changed, and none of them knew exactly what. His mother didn't sleep that night. She sat by the small kerosene lamp, the letter open on her lap like she was waiting for it to change into money. She read it again at dawn, whispering some lines under her breath. It wasn't just a letter. It was an invitation. The man, who turned out to be someone working with a scholarship foundation, had written to say he wanted the boy to come to the city for a new school. A place with chairs that weren't shared. With fans. With books that didn't have torn covers. The next morning, she followed her son to the headmaster's house. Her wrapper was clean, and she wore the red slippers she kept for special days. The headmaster read the letter too. He didn't say much, just nodded and cleared his throat twice. Then he smiled, the way you do when a child you once scolded starts flying. By the end of the week, the boy had one pair of trousers, one shirt borrowed from his cousin, and his name written on the back of his school bag with blue ink. The vehicle that came for him looked like it belonged in another world. It had glass windows, soft seats, and air that smelled like soap. His friends gathered. Some waved. Some just stared. One shouted, "Don't forget us when you start speaking English through your nose." He laughed. Not out of pride, just nerves. His mother held his hand tightly. She didn't cry, but her eyes stayed red. She told him not to lose his manners or his memory. "No book, but know your people too," she said. As the vehicle pulled away, the trees started to blur. He had never left the village before. Everything past the last farm looked new. Strange. Wide. But he kept his face straight. He sat quietly, his small bag on his lap, the brown envelope still inside it. The man beside him didn't talk much either. Once in a while, he looked at the boy and smiled, like he already knew how the story might end. And just like that, the journey to the city began, with more hope than certainty. The city was loud. Everything moved fast, cars, people, even the air. Buildings stood like giants, and signs blinked at him in colors he didn't know names for. He held his bag tighter, afraid it might slip off in this strange new place. The school was something else. Tall fences, smooth floors, and walls that didn't have cracks. The other students wore neat uniforms with shiny shoes. Some had lunchboxes that looked like small suitcases. He didn't speak much on his first day. He just watched. During break, he sat alone under a tree. He brought out his old book, not to read, just to hold. It reminded him of something quiet. A boy passed by, stopped, and asked, "Is that yours?" He nodded. The boy smiled. "You write like you speak, sharp." Then he ran off before he could answer. Classes were different here. Teachers didn't shout. They asked questions like they really wanted to hear what you had to say. There were computers. Real ones. When he first touched one, it felt like he was holding something from the future. But not everything came easy. The other students spoke fast, using words he hadn't learned yet. Some called him Bush Boy behind his back. One even laughed at his sandals. That night, he washed his only shirt 3 times and placed it near the fan to dry. He didn't complain. Instead, he worked harder. He read longer. He wrote more. Even when his eyes hurt, he kept going. Sometimes, in the quiet of night, he missed home. The mango tree. His mother's voice. The sound of rain on their zinc roof. One evening, he sat outside the dormitory, staring at the moon. The same moon that hung over his village. He whispered to it like an old friend, "I hope you're still watching me." The wind carried nothing back. But he smiled anyway. That weekend, he wrote a letter to his mother. His handwriting was neater now. His spelling had improved. But the message was the same: "I'm still learning. I'm still trying. I miss you." And for the first time, he ended it with something new: "One day, I'll make you proud." He didn't know when it started, but soon, the teachers began to notice him. It wasn't just his answers, they were sharp, yes, but it was how he listened. How he wrote like he was pouring something from deep inside. One teacher called him aside and asked, "Who taught you how to think like that?" He smiled and said, "I walk a lot. I think on the road." Weeks turned into months. The boy who once sat alone under the tree now had people sitting beside him. They borrowed his notes. They asked him to explain things the teacher had already said. He didn't boast. He didn't change. He still washed his shirt himself and ate slowly like food was gold. But deep down, something in him was growing, like a seed finally waking up. One day, during assembly, the principal held up a brown envelope. "We have something special," she said, smiling. There was a writing competition. Over 1,000 students entered. Only one story stood out. He wasn't thinking of himself. He was looking at the clouds, wondering if they looked like rain. Then she called his name. Everything stopped. He walked up slowly. The hall went quiet. His shoes weren't shining, but his heart was. The principal gave him the envelope and whispered, "You're different. Don't hide it." That evening, he called his mother using a borrowed phone. "Mama," he said, trying not to cry, "they said my story won. They said I'm special." She didn't say much. Just sighed and said, "I told you book will answer you one day." He laughed, a soft one that sounded like hope. The next week, they asked him to read his story in front of everyone. He stood on the stage, hands shaking. But when he opened his mouth, the words came out like water. Clean. Strong. Familiar. When he finished, there was silence. Then applause. Loud. Long. The same boys who once mocked his slippers now lined up to shake his hand. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because he missed home. But because, for the first time, he didn't feel out of place. He felt seen. Letters started coming from home more often. His mother would get someone at the church to help her write. Sometimes she just sent short messages like, "I carried your story to the market today," or "They now greet me differently." He kept every letter under his mattress like treasure. But city life wasn't always warm. There were days he felt like the walls were too tall, like everyone else had wings but him. Some weekends, other students went home. He stayed back, pretending to be busy, pretending he didn't mind. He missed the sound of his name being called from across the compound. He missed being known. Then one Saturday, while sweeping the class alone, the door creaked and a teacher walked in. She didn't scold him for being there. She sat down and said, "I've been reading your stories." He froze. She continued, "They don't just show skill. They carry heart. Where did you learn that?" He shrugged. "I just write how I feel." She smiled. "Then keep feeling. But write clearer, sharper. You have a voice. Use it." From that day, she became his quiet mentor. She gave him new books. She taught him how to rewrite without losing the soul of his story. "Write until your words smell like truth," she told him. His writing changed. It had always had fire, but now it had shape too. More competitions came. He entered. He didn't always win, but he was always noticed. One morning, the principal called him to the office. There was another letter, this time from a newspaper. They wanted to publish one of his stories. The editor had read it during a school visit and had been moved. "It made me cry," the letter said. He read that line 10 times. When the paper came out, his story sat on page 6, right beside a piece about a famous musician. He stared at his name in print, tracing each letter like it wasn't real. That night, he wrote another letter home. It said only this, "Your son is in the papers." And somewhere in that same village, his mother bought a copy and carried it on her head like a tray of gold. News traveled faster than wind. By the next term, even students from other schools knew his name. Not because he shouted it, but because his stories whispered through pages and stayed in people's minds. One morning, while dusting chalk off a desk, a junior student stopped him and said, "I read your story. I didn't cry, but it held me." He smiled. That's enough. Soon, he was invited to speak at a youth event. He had never used a microphone before. His heart beat like a drum, but he stood straight, held the mic like it was part of him, and said, I walked to school because I believed something was waiting for me at the end of the road." When he finished, there was a pause, then a rising cheer. Not wild, but full, like the sound of people seeing something bright in someone small. But as things got better, pressure also grew. He had more work, more expectations. People began to say things like, "Don't fall off, and you're our pride now." It made his chest feel heavy sometimes. He started sleeping late, trying to do more, trying not to let anyone down. One day, he collapsed during evening prep. The teacher said he fainted from stress. The nurse told him, "Your body is not cement. Rest." Lying in the clinic bed, he thought of home. The smell of soaked Gary. The way his mother rubbed his back when he had fever. He didn't cry, but he let silence sit with him for a while. His teacher visited. She brought him oranges and a notebook. "Even champions need to breathe," she said, placing the book on the table. After he recovered, he changed his rhythm. He still studied hard, but now, he also laughed more. Walked slower. Sat under trees like before. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. He wrote a new story after that. Not for competition. Just for himself. It was about a boy who almost forgot how to smile until he remembered the sound of his mother's cooking spoon tapping the pot. That story didn't win any prize. But he loved it more than any other. Because it came from a place he never wanted to lose. Exams came like wind, fast, loud, and unforgiving. He didn't panic. He just prepared like someone walking a path he already knew. While others stayed up with loud music and energy drinks, he studied quietly, taking breaks to sit under the neem tree behind the library. The day the results came out, students crowded around the notice board, pushing, shouting. He stood at the back, waiting. He wasn't in a hurry. When he finally walked up and scanned the list, he saw his number beside something sweet, first position. He didn't jump. He didn't scream. He simply smiled, folded the paper in his hand, and walked back to class. Later, the school called his mother. They said she should come for prize-giving day. She had never been to the city before, never entered a car with windows that could roll up. But she came, wrapper tied well, her best blouse ironed by a neighbor. When she saw him in his white shirt and neat trousers, she just stared. "You look like a teacher," she whispered. The event was bright. Parents clapped. Students wore their best. When they called his name, he walked up to the stage, collected the prize, and searched the crowd for his mother. She waved, both hands high. She didn't care who was watching. After the event, she held the prize box like it was a newborn. "You carried my name up there," she said, touching his head softly. They sat under a tree, sharing a plate of rice with one spoon. She told him stories of the village, of how the neighbor's goat now slept inside the house, and how the old well finally dried up. He laughed so much his stomach hurt. Then she grew quiet. "City life has cleaned you," she said. "But don't let it wipe your heart." He nodded. He wouldn't. When she left the next day, he walked her to the car. She looked back twice, her bag hanging on one arm, pride sitting in her eyes. And as the vehicle drove off, he stood still, waving until he couldn't see her anymore. He didn't cry. But something warm rolled down his cheek anyway. Time passed like a slow river, and the boy kept growing, inside and out. The village heard more about him now. Not just whispers but stories told loud. The man with glasses, who had once stopped to listen, became a friend. He visited often, bringing books and advice wrapped in smiles. One evening, the man took him to a place called the Hall of Glass. It was tall and shiny, with mirrors that stretched to the sky. Inside, people sat in rows, listening to voices that spoke of dreams, struggles, and hope. The boy was asked to share his story. At first, his voice trembled. The bright lights made him blink too much. But then he remembered the mango tree and the long road. He breathed deep. His words came slow, steady, like rain falling soft on dry earth. He spoke of walking miles to learn, of hunger and hope, of a mother who carried his story like treasure. When he finished, the hall stayed quiet. Then, like a wave, applause filled the space. Not just polite clapping, but hands pounding in celebration. That night, he looked out of a tall window and saw the city lights like stars. He thought of the village, the trees, the road he once walked. He smiled, knowing he had come far, but not too far. The next morning, a letter arrived from the village. His mother wrote about the harvest, the children playing by the river, and how the neighbors asked about him every day. He kept the letter in his pocket. It was his anchor. His journey was no longer just about learning. It was about carrying the village with him, inside his heart, his stories, and his dreams. The boy returned to the village months later. He stepped off the bus with his small bag and a smile that carried 1,000 stories. The dirt road felt softer under his feet. The mango tree still stood, its branches full of green leaves. People gathered. Neighbors he barely knew came to shake his hand. Children ran around him, asking questions faster than he could answer. His mother stood by the gate, eyes shining brighter than the morning sun. He didn't need fancy clothes or big words. Just his stories and the road he had walked. That evening, they sat around a fire. The village storyteller asked him to share what he had learned. His voice was steady, warm, and filled with the songs of both city and village. He spoke of hard work and hope, of laughter and tears, and how sometimes the longest journeys lead you back home. The villagers listened, some nodded, some smiled, and even the children quieted down to hear. His mother sat close, proud but quiet, her hands folded in her lap. As the fire flickered and the stars blinked above, he looked around and knew the road he walked was never just about learning. It was about carrying the village with him, wherever he went, whoever he became. And that night, the boy who once walked miles every day to learn, finally felt like he had come home.